At 1:43 a.m., the body is finally ready to shut the shop, and the brain opens a small investigation desk beside the pillow. Out come the files. Unfinished task, strange thing you said, 3 years ago, tomorrow's problem, and one suspicious noise that may be a pipe or may be an international incident. Nothing useful is usually getting solved in this room. There is no committee, no whiteboard, no reasonable business hours, just a tired person lying very still while the mind starts calling witnesses. And the unfair part is not that the thoughts appear, the unfair part is that, after midnight, they arrive wearing tiny badges of urgency. During the day, the brain is not exactly peaceful. It is just busy getting interrupted. Tasks, people, messages, chores, screens, tiny decisions, larger decisions, and the sacred modern ritual of remembering why you entered a room all keep grabbing attention. Basically, the day is mental traffic. Not calm, not elegant, but useful because every new demand keeps internal noise from becoming the only sound in the building. Then night arrives, and most of that traffic disappears. The room gets still, the body stops moving, the ceiling offers absolutely no content strategy, and suddenly the brain has empty space to fill. So silence explains why thoughts get a stage, but it does not explain why the stage immediately becomes a courtroom. Researchers have a clean little name for this bedtime disaster: pre-sleep cognitive arousal. The term sounds technical. The idea is simple. It means the body has gone horizontal, but the mind has not clocked out. Worry is still moving, racing thoughts are still doing laps. Anxious thinking is still touching every locked door in the house, mentally speaking. So the bed is not a rest place yet. It is more like a quiet office where one exhausted employee forgot to turn off all the machines. And this is not just a poetic complaint from people who hate their ceiling. Research has linked repetitive negative thinking with poorer sleep quality, shorter sleep time, and taking longer to fall asleep. So yes, thoughts can keep the person awake. But that sounds like the whole answer, and it is not. Then the person does the most human thing possible. They notice sleep is not happening, and immediately promote sleep into a task. Now the brain is not just thinking, it is supervising. Am I relaxed enough? Am I almost asleep? Did I just ruin tomorrow? Excellent questions for a creature currently trapped under a blanket. The problem is that normal sleep is not really a button you press harder. It is partly automatic, and direct effort can turn the whole thing into a performance review. So trying harder to sleep can make the brain more awake, which is rude, but biologically very on brand. Once sleep becomes a task, the bedroom gains a terrible new object: the clock. In clock monitoring experiments, people told to watch the clock while trying to sleep reported more bedtime worry and a longer perceived wait for sleep. They did not just notice time, they turned time into evidence. In one study, the clock watchers overestimated how long it took to fall asleep by about 24 minutes, more than twice the control group's estimate, which is impressive in the worst possible direction. The clock starts as information, then quietly becomes a tiny anxiety scoreboard. But even if the clock vanished, the night would still have another problem. The same thought is not being processed in the same emotional weather. Studies on circadian mood suggest that during the biological night, negative feeling can rise while positive feeling drops. So a thought that looked annoying at 2 p.m. can look strangely official at 2 a.m. Not because it became more true, because the tired brain is handling it with worse lighting, worse filters, and possibly the confidence of a raccoon in a filing cabinet. Researchers even use the phrase "the mind after midnight" for this darker shift in mood and emotional regulation. Sleep loss can also make emotional material hit harder, because the systems that react to threat may get louder while control systems do a worse job calming them down. So the thought is not just alone in a quiet room anymore. It is alone with a tired emotional system, and that changes the volume. And that brings us to the next strange part. The brain after midnight is not pulling files at random. It seems to have a taste for open loops, unfinished tasks, awkward social moments, future risks, unresolved stress, and tiny uncertain noises all have the same useful smell to a tired threat-checking system. Not important necessarily, just unfinished, socially expensive, or flavored vaguely like danger. Some of these files may point to real problems because life does occasionally submit paperwork after business hours. But at 2 a.m., the brain is not selecting thoughts by usefulness. It is selecting by unfinishedness and then stamping them with urgency like a very dramatic office clerk. That explains why the files appear, but it still does not explain why the files become a whole cinema. because the brain is not only a problem detector, it is also a content generator. Researchers often connect mind wandering with the default mode network, a system linked to task unrelated thought when attention drifts away from the outside world. The term sounds like a boring phone setting. The idea is much more familiar. During the day, this can be useful. Memory, imagination, planning, rehearsing, inventing a comeback 6 hours too late. Normal brain activity. Slightly petty, but normal. In bed, though, the outside world is mostly gone. So the same system gets a blank ceiling, a dark room, and no external editor telling it to please stop producing season 2. The problem is not that the brain suddenly becomes deep at midnight. It has lost the world that usually edits the show. But the body is not just lying there politely waiting for the brain to finish its little film festival. Underneath all this, an older sleep system is pushing in the opposite direction. Sleep pressure builds the longer you stay awake, and it works with the body's circadian rhythm, the internal day-night timing system. One contributor is adenosine, a chemical that builds during wakefulness and helps make the need for sleep harder to ignore. Basically, the body is stacking sleepy weights on the bed, but the mind is still standing at the doorway with a clipboard, a projector, and several urgent folders nobody asked for. So the person can be biologically ready for sleep while mentally blocking the handoff. And then modern life adds one last insult. The thing people use to escape the thoughts can quietly keep the night office open. A light-emitting screen is not just a tiny rectangle of peace. In controlled research, evening use of light-emitting e-readers made people take longer to fall asleep, reduced evening melatonin, shifted circadian timing later, and left them less alert the next morning. That does not mean the phone is the villain of the entire story, but it does bring white novelty, messages, tasks, and unresolved social signals into the exact window where the brain is supposed to stop accepting new clients. So the escape hatch becomes another entrance, not because the person is weak, but because the timing is terrible and the screen is very good at being interesting. By now, the whole system looks unfair, but this is where the story has to be careful. A night thought is not automatically fake just because it arrived wearing pajamas and bad timing. Some files do point to real stress, real decisions, real conversations, real messes that deserve attention later, when the brain has daylight and better tools. The trick is that night can distort urgency without deleting meaning. Occasional overthinking is common, but if sleep problems last for months or start damaging daily life, that is no longer just a quirky midnight office issue. That is a good reason to bring in real support, because even the most dramatic brain clerk should not be running the whole building alone. So by this point, the mystery is not one single cause, it is a pile-up. Silence removes the traffic, the room gives thoughts a stage, the tired emotional system turns up the volume, and unfinished files start arriving with little urgency stamps. Then sleep itself becomes a task, the clock starts keeping score, and a screen can quietly feed new material into the office. None of this proves the thought is automatically true. It proves the thought is being processed in a terrible operating environment. Nighttime overthinking is often problem-solving software running at the worst possible hour, with dramatic lighting and no adult supervision. And that brings us back to the bed. The room is still quiet, the body is still tired, and the brain may still slide one more file across the desk. But now, the file does not have to be treated like a royal command from the truth department. It can be a memo. Maybe useful, maybe worth checking later. Maybe just the work of a tired detective with bad lighting and too much empty office space. The person in bed is not weak for hearing it. They are listening to a system that gets louder when the world gets quieter. The brain after midnight is not always wiser. Sometimes it just has fewer witnesses.